Howdy folks, Scanner here. Sorry if I look up from time to time during this video. I have a new camera mounted monitor that I'm just not used to. And I keep looking up at it. So that will go away over time, I hope. What we're doing today is we're going through some references and Easter eggs in the campaign rules. Just fun little bits and bobs that I've picked up on. Some that Tuomas has kind of pointed out to me are interesting and worth looking into a little more to learn more about the world, the rules of Trench Crusade, right? Trench Crusade has its own way that it's approaching world building, that it's approaching its version of the Abrahamic religions that it's discussing. And some of these things are quite interesting, so we can dive into them. I want to start with some of the more obtuse ones early. I just, not everyone's going to watch deep into the video, so let's just get stuck into them. So first of all is lordship of this world. In the campaign rules it says, it is written that the powers of evil wielded the greatest influence over the material world. The most formidable servants of the pit, who bear a unique mark, can torment the very earth itself and bend it to do their bidding. And that is kind of harking to Corinthians 4:4 in the Bible, which the exact phrasing of it I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but it does heavily imply that it's Satan who's the lord of the earth. Now, not Lucifer. I know people get very confused about kind of the Lucifer Satan thing, and that's true enough for Trench Crusade as well as standard religion. Lucifer is the fallen angel. Satan is who Lucifer became. In a way, you could see Satan as being part name, part job title, in essence, and that is Lucifer. That's who he would end up becoming over time, is Satan. And some people treat them as different things. Some demonologies treat them as different things. It is what it is. But yeah, it's an interesting one to have in there, lordship of this world. It does appear to be indicating, everybody's been wondering who top dog in hell, in the damned is in Trench Crusade. It's looking kind of like Satan, based off that. So there is multiple references to pieces of silver, and that's obviously Judas's silver, right? Judas betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of gold. So it's obviously one of those pieces. And there's a couple of references to pieces of silver throughout the rules, which is, it's obvious to anybody who grew up in any kind of like Christian religion, but might not be so obvious to people outside of it or people who are just old, like me. You might have forgotten. One of the more interesting ones, and I actually checked with Tuomas to see if I was right on this one. There is a evil book. Each Oxia sorcerer carries a book copied from the Coractor, the original tome of Goethic magic, said to have been written by the angel Samael, who is also known as Venom of God. The reason an angel would have authored such a book is unknown, if the story is even true at all. So the Coractor, the name Coractor comes from a book. I actually need to look at my phone for this one because I forgot to put it in my notes. Comes from a book called Cravat. Now, I've just finished reading Cravat. I read it because of this reference. In Cravat, there is a series of books called the Coractors, and they're basically like evil grimoires, essentially. And Cravat is about a young man who keeps having this dream calling him to a windmill. And he goes to the windmill and he kind of gets into situations over his head. I don't want to spoil anything. Basically, I would like people to go and read the book Cravat if you want to. It was written in 1971. I read it. I quite enjoyed it. I enjoyed the reference there, but that's what that is. The Coractor is evil grimoires in those books. So yeah, there's a reference to the Horn of Joshua. The Horn of Joshua is like a horn you blow. It's a ram's horn, the musical instrument, I guess. It's a traditional Jewish instrument. Sorry if I butcher this. Called a shofar, and it's made from a ram's horn. It's used for religious purposes. In the biblical story of Joshua, the Israelites marched around the city of Jericho for 6 days, with priests blowing the shofar trumpets daily. And then on the seventh day, they circled the city 7 times, and one last blast of the shofar, the walls of Jericho fell down. So that's what that is a reference to, the horn of Joshua. Alrighty, donkey's jawbone. Blessed by Yahweh, this bone club grants its wielder the strength of Samson himself. So in the Bible, in the story of Samson, Samson gets into it with a bunch of Philistines, grabs the donkey's jawbone and kills 1,000 of them. He uses a donkey's jawbone as a weapon to kill 1,000 of them. I find this to be very interesting because you can't really build a club out of a donkey's jawbone. I don't know how many of you are donkey aware, alert to the presence and threat represented by donkeys, which is fucking real, might I add. But donkeys, they can literally chew your leg off, but they don't have particularly big jaws by any means. So I find it interesting that it's a bone club. I'm kind of hung up on that, and I haven't quite figured out what I think that means yet. There's lots of references to giants in the Bible. I don't know if they're trying to say that the donkey was a giant, if Samson was a giant. There's other references to giants in Trench Crusade, which we'll get to. But yeah, just interesting to think of that. But that's what that is, basically. The donkey's jawbone is from the Samson myth. And there's another reference to Samson, which we might as well cover now, the lock of Samson's hair. So Samson was gifted great strength by God, and the source of his strength was his hair. Samson also loved chicks. Every mistake the guy made in his life was over a chick. And he ended up telling this bird called Delilah that the hair was the source of his power. She got a servant to cut his hair while he was sleeping, and he woke up, he was powerless. She handed him over to the Philistines. They blinded him and enslaved him in a temple. And at one point, God gives him back one last burst of great strength, and he pulls down the pillars of the temple, and he collapses the temple on top of himself and his tormentors. But yeah, that's the lock of Samson's hair. So another interesting one, I should say. Two references to Samson. Samson's a very popular guy in the Trench Crusade world. Damascus armor. So that's obviously, this is no great shakes or anything. It's a clear reference to Damascus steel. But you have to wonder how deep the devs are going with these references, because Damascus steel, it's very high carbon steel, right? So it's strong, it's very shatter resistant, it's very valued. As far as I know, what's called Wootz technique of its creation and construction has been lost, and they're kind of piecing it back together now. But it's not what it was, basically. And there's also a strong thought that the name Damascus steel was kind of a branding thing, that a lot of the steel came in from Iran and from India. And if that's the case in Trench Crusade, if the steel is coming in from Iran and from India, then you've got the obvious tithe, shall we say, that appears to be coming in from India. And that could have a big knock-on effect in the world of Trench Crusade, right? That could mean something. What it means, I don't know. But it depends on how deep the devs are going, basically, with these references and with these Easter eggs and things like that. The mark of Cain. So Cain and Abel were the first sons of Adam and Eve. And in turn, Cain became the first murderer. He was into plants, and Abel was a shepherd, basically. And they were asked by God for sacrifice. So Cain gives up a bunch of dope harvest, and Abel gives up the best sheep in the flock and kills it in God's name. And God's like, damn, Abel, fucking love a bit of animal sacrifice in the Bible, so I'm really going to dig that. Cain gets mad, kills Abel in a fit of jealousy, becomes the first murderer. God forgives Cain, because apparently, God will forgive just about anything, and puts a mark of Cain on him to protect him, because he's worried about people seeking retribution against Cain for the murder of Abel. And that's where that comes from. That's what that means. It's the same in the book, basically. If you have this mark, you're protected a little bit from damage. So, "'Tis but a scratch" is another reference. That's a Monty Python one. The Black Knight, he's getting his bits chopped off, and he's like, "Oh, 'tis but a scratch." Now, this is a double whammy. There's two double whammy Monty Python references, because Monty Python was so referential of other things, basically. So "'Tis But a Scratch" in Monty Python was highly likely a reference to Romeo and Juliet, where Mercutio, after getting fatally wounded, says "'tis a scratch." And then there's the Holy Hand Grenade, which is a very clear reference to the Holy Hand Grenade of New Antioch from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. That was a parody of these things called Globus Cruciae, which are the crown jewels, basically, of the UK, and very specifically the Sovereign Orb. And that's what the Holy Hand Grenade of New Antioch was modeled off in the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and this is a reference to that. And then, funnily enough, there's no UK in Trench Crusade. So, these things can be funny, they can be deep, they can be whatever, but sometimes they are what they are. The demonic aura grenade is a clear reference towards radioactivity. People got mad at me for the way I described it before, so I'm not going to describe it again because I just don't want people getting mad at me. But yeah, think about it. It gives off a demonic aura. It gives off a bold green glow. People get sick and armor doesn't protect them. It is what it is. This one I struggle to pronounce. Furussia. I have no idea. And that is it's a Furussia sword, I think, is in the rules, and it's a Arabic code. Basically, Furussia is an Arabic code for knights. Think of it as being like a chivalry. People think chivalry was all about being polite, but chivalry was also like kind of how you fought, how you carried yourself on the battlefield, and even some combat techniques. And this is the same as that. It's from pre-Islamic Arabia. And it involves horse archery and use of the lance and use of the sword and things of that nature. But that's what that's referencing. And I think that's quite cool. This is a big one. The fruit from the tree of good and evil knowledge. So this is going to take a minute to get through. The first thing to note here is that the name of that tree is different from the one used in the real religion. In the Bible, it's known as the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Here, it's called the fruit of the tree of good and evil knowledge. Why do I think that is? I think it's just separation. I think every now and then the devs take obvious steps to let it be known that the Abrahamic religions they're talking about and examining in these games and the way they're presenting them is not real. It's not the real religion. People can argue all day if they want to call these things a commentary on the real religion, but they're not actually the real religion. And I think the reason why these names change sometimes is to just draw that little bit of separation between them, a little gentle reminder. So let's dig in on this one because it's an interesting one. So the fruit from the tree of good and evil knowledge. Amongst the bones of giant humans unearthed by the ravages of war, you discover a golden-hued fruit wrapped in spun cloth. So we're going to go backwards here. Spun cloth does get mentioned a few times in the Bible, and spun cloth is commonly referenced as a thing that was involved in the creation of tabernacles. And if you don't know what a tabernacle is, it's quite important in Catholicism and a lot of Christian religions. I think I don't have a massive exposure to all the denominations. Like, I grew up Catholic in Ireland. We didn't really give a shit about anything else. It's not like I was learning about fucking, random religions and stuff. But the tabernacle was hugely important. It was where the Eucharist was kept and all this kind of stuff. And spun cloth was also used to create the robes for priests in the Bible. So you've got spun cloth. You've got amongst the bones of giant humans. Now, giants get mentioned a few times in the Bible. They could be Nephilim from Genesis 6:4, potential offspring of angels and men, a hybrid race of giants, potentially descendants of Seth, the son of Adam. They were considered wicked and evil, and they were killed in the flood that God sent. Noah built the boat. So they could be Anakim from Numbers 13:33 and Deuteronomy 1:28. They're a tribe of giants who lived in the land of Canaan. There's lots of other reference to the giants in the Bible. There's Goliath is a giant. There's the Rephaim that are giants. There's giants in Egypt. There's giants all over the place. So it's hard to know exactly what giants these could be with the bones of their bones are with the fruit, a golden hued fruit wrapped in spun cloth. And then there's the fruit itself. And this is the most interesting bit. I really enjoyed researching this bit. So the Bible doesn't say what the fruit is. In Western Christianity, we associate the fruit as an apple a lot. And it's been proposed that one of the reasons why we do that is when early settling was occurring and early kind of, converting was being done of druidic tribes to Christianity. The apple is a very important fruit for various druidic tribes, druidic beliefs, pagan beliefs. And by using the apple to represent this bad thing, they were basically kind of using it as a means of saying, look, don't worry about the old ways, worry about the new ways. Don't think about that old shit, worry about this new hotness. And yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it. In Greek Christianity, the fruit of the tree is often considered to be a pomegranate. And that's likely because within Greek mythology, Hades convinced Persephone to eat pomegranate seeds in Hades. And or in whatever the hell that shit is called. I don't know if it's called Hades. Hang on. Because if you eat them basically in the underworld, you can't leave. So he tricks her into doing it, and she's stuck there forever. So that's kind of an interesting. Once again, that association is there, right, with something old, casting it as something bad, and old myth. We'll take a piece of the old myth, we'll insert it into our version of Christianity in this location, and we'll go from there. This is probably one of the most dismissive and disrespectful things I'm ever going to say about religion. But it's like you can't get certain flavors of Kit Kats in Europe and you can get them in Japan. They're selling you what works in the region, okay? Sorry. And then some rabbis have suggested that it might be a fig tree. And as always, rabbis come up with the dopest shit because their version of it is, or their argument is, that a fig tree is something that would have been very common in the region. So if you have this thing that's common, if you have this fig tree and it's everywhere, but there's this one fig tree that you can't eat and you eat it anyway, then that's a double fuck you to God. If you think about it, it's like, oh, not only did I just not eat the thing that's all around me, I ate very specifically the thing that you told me not to, even though as far as I was aware, it was basically the same thing. So that's kind of dope as well. But yeah, just something interesting, I think, to think about. And then the final interesting caveat I have here, and there's a lot more, you should go research this stuff. There's a lot more to this, but the last one I have is that there's actually a fresco in Plaincourt Abbey in France from the 13th century that depicts Adam and Eve beside a giant psychoactive species of mushroom. And we know that in the world of Trench Crusade, the hallucinogenics are actually very important. They're used a lot in things like the treatment of the Crusaders and the conversions of the Janissaries and different things, right? There's a lot of the use of hallucinogenics. So that's just, I think, worth pointing out based off how commonly hallucinogenics pop up in the world of Trench Crusade. Okay, this is my favorite one, the next one, I think. Golgatha Techites. I've thought about these a lot. Techites in Trench Crusade are used to create the paladin armor. And they come from Golgatha or Calvary, which is where Christ was crucified in Jerusalem. However, in the real world, Techites do not occur in that area at all. There are no Techites to be found. Techites are basically burn off, is the only way I can think of to describe it, from meteorites, things falling to Earth from space. They're little glass kind of pebbles, almost kind of shards that break off and burn through the atmosphere and end up in our Earth. So they don't happen in real life. So the indicator to me is that at some point, more than likely, over the crucifixion of Christ, God got fairly pissed and launched some shit. at Jerusalem. That's what appears to be the case. The fact that that stuff would go on to become so important and be the basis and extremely vital to the production of paladin armor, it opens up a lot of questions. Like, was God mad? Was God trying to help? Did God, based off the treatment of his son, interpret the eventual fall of man and opening of the gates of hell and try and like give us something to help with that long before it ever happened? I don't know. It's fun to think about and all the rest of it. The next one is really funny to me. Cockroach vitality. So you cannot use blood markers against the melee or ranged attacks of that model. I think that's really interesting because I think it's a reference to the fact that cockroaches don't actually have blood. Cockroaches have a thing called hemolymph, which carries hemocytes. They don't have any hemoglobin in the liquid that gets pushed around their body. So I think that's what that is. I think it might be a reference to the fact that cockroaches don't have blood. Now, it does not remove them completely from the blood marker system, and I think that's because if it did, it would be completely overpowered. So anybody who's going to say, but they can still take blood markers, it's like, yeah, of course they can. You can't make them immune to the fucking central damage system of the game. But you can do a sneaky little reference to the fact that cockroaches don't have blood. So yeah, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. Tuomas, let me know. Rightfully guided. I think this is a nod to the term rightly guided, which is a Islamic saying. Now, I only have the Sunni version of it here. I know there's different iterations of... Look, real world religion is a bit of a minefield. So I can't explain the aspects of absolutely everything. But I know that the term rightly guided is contested as to which of the first four caliphs that it actually applies to. I know that much. But depending on who you talk to and what they believe, the first four, or some of the first four, or one of the first four caliphs had a degree of, assistance depending on how closely they followed the teachings of Muhammad, that they were considered to be a great leader of their communities and kind of knew what was coming. And rightfully guided means you can pick an action and ignore the result of it, basically, against a unit. So yeah, I think that's what that is. I think it's a reference to rightly guided. Gures, if I'm pronouncing that properly, Gures, that helps you if you're downed in the game, and that's actually a form of Turkish wrestling. So that makes a lot of sense too. You're a guy, you've got some wrestling skills, you're better at fighting when you're downed, basically. And I like that a lot. David and Goliath gets mentioned. And for anybody who doesn't know about David and Goliath, this is an ability that allows you to do more damage against bigger things than you, essentially. So it makes complete sense for the David and Goliath myth. In the myth is actually quite interesting. It's been a long time since I really paid attention to the David and Goliath myth, probably since I was a child. And I realized I had misremembered or just straight up gotten some things wrong. So Goliath first shows up basically with an army. He's not like the leader of it or anything. He's just a soldier in it. And his challenge is send somebody out to scrap me and winner takes all. So Goliath is described as being, where is it? I don't want to get this wrong. He's described as being 6 cubits and a span, which means he's 9 foot 9 inches tall, or just under 3 meters. So if anybody's keeping count, that puts him a full 3 feet taller than my boy Burke, which is pretty fucking tall. So nobody wants to fight him. David is tasked with bringing some stuff to his brothers who are there. And after about like 40 days or whatever, nobody has still fought Goliath. So this was apparently the time when you could have entire standing armies just milling around doing fuck all. And you were just feeding them and paying them. It was all gravy. So David shows up and he's like, this guy's talking a lot of shit. I'm going to deal with him. Goes out, filled with all kinds of confidence because he's dealt with wolves and he's dealt with lions. And he really feels like he'll have God on his side. I always misremember it as like David was somehow scared to do it, but he really wasn't. Like, he didn't give a shit, man. He was YOLOing it. So fair play to him. Mendelist chemicals. Mendel pops up a lot. in Trench Crusade. He's a very important part of the technological advancement and the communicant process, the Mendelist monks in Trench Crusade. So that's a clear reference to Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics. He was an Austrian biologist, meteorologist, mathematician, friar, and abbot. One of the things that we do a lot is we associate, rightfully, I think, the church with the Dark Ages, which was a time of just scientific stalling and academic stalling in a way. But the church also, when those days were over or beforehand, it created a lot of opportunity for smart minds to do smart things, and Gregor Mendel was definitely one of them. Yeah, so he discovered things like dominant and recessive genes. He was doing a lot of study in things like peas. He was a very early thinker of a lot of the genetic concepts that we now take for standard. And it wasn't until about 30 years later that people were really kind of proving how right he was. So imagine a 3-decade advance in our understanding of genetics, and that's where Trench Crusade is. And then you've got all the other shit on top of that. So it's just an interesting little eye-opener into the world of Trench Crusade scientifically. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is the Temporal Lord. The Temporal Lord is a clear reference to the Lord Temporal, no surprise there, which in British Parliament refers to a peer, a member of the House of Lords, who is not a member of the clergy. Members of the clergy are considered the Lord Spiritual. So you've got Lord Temporal, Lord Spiritual, and the Lord Spiritual are bishops in the Church of England. Lords Temporal can be life peers or hereditary peers. The existence of temporal lords does imply the existence of spiritual lords as well. So maybe that's something we see up or come up further down the line. Interestingly, at no point in the campaign rules is the word spiritual used. So that doesn't mean shit. I just found it to be quite interesting. So yeah, that's what I gleaned from going through the rules as they exist right now. And keep in mind, I'm not going to be able to get every Easter egg. And I'm definitely not going to interpret them all correctly. And I'm definitely not going to get even all the references correctly. So you should go through, have a look for yourself, and see what you can find. I think this video is already pretty long. So I'm going to call it, yeah, we're just coming up on like half an hour-ish. So yeah, I'm going to call it. This one was a huge amount of fun. It's been a minute since I've done a talking to the camera video, and I like them. So I'll do more over the coming weeks, most likely. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you're enjoying the trenches, and all the best. Slán go fóill. Aye.